The dog hit the end of its leash so hard that the leather cracked like a whip, and the man holding it laughed before the sound had even finished. I heard the laugh before I saw the animal. That is the thing about my post that people never understand. The ears do the work the eyes are not permitted to do. My eyes belong to the middle distance, to a fixed point above the crowd where nothing is happening and nothing is meant to happen. But my ears range everywhere. So I heard the laugh, low and pleased with itself, and I heard the scrabble of claws on wet cobblestone, and I heard a woman somewhere near the railing draw a breath she did not let out. And in the half-second before the dog came into the edge of my vision, I already knew the shape of the morning. My name is Corvin Vane. On that morning I had stood the east gate of the palace forecourt for 2 hours and 11 minutes, and I would have stood it 2 hours and 11 minutes more without shifting my weight from the ball of 1 foot, because that is the post, and the post is the whole of the thing. Red tunic, black bearskin, heavy as a full pail of water on the crown of the head, white gloves, the rifle at the shoulder, its weight a familiar ache that had long ago stopped being pain and become simply the truth of the arm. I do not move, I do not speak, I do not turn my head to look at the men who wish, more than they wish for anything else in their small day, to make me turn my head. That is the discipline, and the discipline is not a cage. People think it is a cage. It is not. It is the opposite of a cage. It is the one place in the whole loud world where a man decides, entirely by himself, what will and will not move him. The dog was a big one. I saw it low in my vision, a broad brindled chest and a heavy squared head, ears pinned flat, and I saw the leash paid out to its full length so that the animal stood barely astride from the toe of my boot with its whole weight thrown forward. Behind it the man had both feet planted and both hands wrapped in the leash, leaning back against the pull the way you lean against a rope in a tug of war, grinning at the crowd he had gathered as though the crowd were his and the dog were his, and the morning were his to spend. "Watch this," he said, not to me, to them, to the ring of phones already lifting. "Watch this, watch, he's not gonna move. He's not allowed to move, watch." I have heard some version of watch this perhaps 400 times in the years I have stood the gates. It arrives in every accent the world produces. It is the small liturgy of the man who has found a person he believes cannot answer him, and it is always spoken to an audience, because a man who truly did not care whether I moved would not need 40 strangers to see that I did not. So I did not move, and I did not look at him, and I fixed my eyes on the point above the crowd where the gray morning met the gray stone of the far wing, and I let the world do what it would do. The dog lunged. It came off its front feet with a bark that was more cough than roar, a deep chesty explosion of noise, and its jaws snapped shut in the empty air a hand's breadth from my knee. I felt the wind of it. I felt the fine spray. And I understood in the cold, clean way that the post teaches you to understand things, 3 facts at once and in order. The first fact was that the animal was terrified. Not vicious. Terrified. There is a bark that means I will end you, and there is a bark that means keep away from me, and this was the second one, high at the edges, the eyes rolling white at the corners, the tail clamped so far under the belly that it had disappeared. The man behind it had wound it up like a spring and pointed it at the strangest, tallest, most unmoving thing in the square and turned it loose. And now the dog was doing the only thing a frightened animal on the end of a short leash can do, which is to make itself as loud and as large as its terror requires. The second fact was that the leash was old. I could see the wear on it where it left the man's fists, the leather gone pale and cracked along one edge, a hairline split running up from the brass snap. It would hold for a lunge. It would hold for 2. I could not have told you it would hold for 3. The third fact was the woman at the railing to my left, and the small child half hidden against her coat. I am not permitted to turn my head. I want that understood before I tell the rest of it, because everything that came after turns on it. The whole architecture of my morning, the whole reason a thing that took perhaps 90 seconds could be argued about for a week afterward, rests on the fact that I was a man forbidden to move standing a stride away from a frightened animal on a failing leash, and that just beyond the animal was a small person at the exact height of the animal's jaws. I saw her the way I see everything I am not looking at the blurred edge. In the gray margin the drill sergeants spend years teaching you not to trust and then, in the same breath, teaching you never to ignore. A woman in a green coat, her hand coming down too slow to gather the little one closer. And the child leaning out, the way the small always lean out, toward the loud, exciting, frightening thing, because the small have not yet learned that the loud, frightening thing is loud and frightening for a reason. The man jerked the leash. He did it to make the dog lunge again. I want to be plain about that, because he said afterward that he was pulling it back, that he was controlling it, that he was the responsible party and I was the reckless one, and there is footage, and the footage does not agree with him. He snapped the leash sideways to fling the dog back toward me, and he called out, "Go on," and he laughed again. And the dog, wild-eyed, spun on the wet stone and lost its footing and scrabbled, and lunged not at me at all but sideways, toward the railing, toward the green coat, toward the small leaning shape, because a terrified animal does not aim. A terrified animal simply explodes in whatever direction the ground gives it. And the old leather split. I heard it go. It is a sound I will carry the rest of my life. Not a snap, not a dramatic thing, just a soft, dull tick, the sound of a shoelace giving out, the smallest sound in the whole square, and it undid the only thing standing between 40 feet of open forecourt and a frightened 80-pound dog and a small child at the height of its jaws. Now here is what they never tell you about the discipline. They tell you what it forbids. They do not tell you what it saves. For years I had stood these gates and let men scream in my face and let women flick my medals and let boys wave their hands an inch from my eyes, and every single time I had done nothing. And every single time the doing of nothing had been a small death, a swallowing, a fist closed in the chest. People pitied me for it when they thought about it at all, the statue who takes it. But the discipline is not the not moving. The discipline is the stillness that means, when the moment finally comes that a man must move, he moves cleanly, without panic, without flourish, without a single wasted motion, because he has spent 10,000 hours learning exactly how much of himself to spend and no more. The stillness is not the opposite of action. The stillness is the reservoir action is drawn from. I moved. I did not decide to move the way you decide to lift a cup. There was no sentence in my head. The rifle came off my shoulder and into both hands, angled flat across my body, the way it had come off my shoulder 10,000 times on the drill square for the salute I had performed until it lived in the bone. And I took one long stride to my left, into the space between the broken leash and the green coat, and I brought the flat of the rifle down and across, not as a weapon, never as a weapon, but as a bar, a low horizontal bar at exactly the height of a lunging dog's chest. And I met the animal not with an edge, but with the long polished length of the stock, and my braced forearm behind it. The dog hit the bar and I gave with it. That is the whole secret, and the man on the leash will never understand it as long as he lives. I did not strike the dog. If you strike a frightened animal, you turn its terror into a fight, and a fight is the one thing in that square nobody would have walked away from clean. I met it and I gave, the way you catch an egg thrown to you, drawing your hands back through the moment of contact, so that all the force bleeds off into distance instead of into damage. The dog's chest hit the rifle and my braced arm, and I let both travel backward 8 inches, a foot, absorbing, turning the lunge into a slow deflected wheel, so that the animal's whole desperate weight went not through the railing and not into the child but around, redirected, spun gently off to the side to spend itself against nothing but air and my own giving body. It knocked me half off my feet. I want that in the record too, because the man later told anyone who would listen that I had attacked his dog, that I had swung a rifle at it. And the truth is that an 80-pound animal moving at the speed of pure fear very nearly put a decorated guardsman on the cobbles, and the only reason it did not is that I had spent half my life learning how not to fall. The bearskin came down over my eyes. For one blind half-second I saw nothing at all, the whole world gone black and hot inside the fur, and I felt the dog against my side, its heart going like a fist on a door, and I heard under the crowd's single indrawn gasp, under the man's voice already rising in outrage, I heard the animal whimper. A high, thin, frightened sound. Not a growl, a whimper. The sound a creature makes when it has thrown everything it has at the world and the world has, very gently, refused to be hurt and refused to hurt it back. I got the bearskin off my brow with a jerk of my neck and I stood, and the dog was pressed against my leg with its tail still clamped and its sides heaving, and it was not attacking me. It was hiding behind me, from the man. The 40 phones caught all of it. I did not look at them. I stood, and I set my feet, and I brought the rifle back up across my body into the guard position, and I let my breathing come back down to the slow count the drill teaches, 4 in, 4 held, 4 out, because a man whose heart is racing will make a bad decision, and a guardsman is not permitted a bad decision. And against my left boot the dog stayed pressed, its whole shaking weight leaned into me, and I did the one thing a man in my position is absolutely not supposed to do. I let it. I could have stepped away. Protocol would have had me step away, reset to my post, restore the frozen line the crowd had paid its mourning to see. But an 80-pound animal that has decided a stranger is the only safe thing in a world of noise does not let go easily, and if I had stepped away it would have followed me, or bolted into the crowd, or wheeled back toward the man who had wound it up like a toy and flung it. So I stood over it, and I let the length of my own body be the wall it hid behind, and I kept my eyes forward on the gray point above the crowd, and I waited. The man was not waiting. Hey, hey. He had recovered his balance and lost his grin, and now he came forward with the frayed leash still in his fist, the useless brass snap swinging at the end of it. He was a big man himself, thick through the shoulders, in the expensive sort of clothes that are made to look careless and cost a month of an ordinary wage. Sunglasses shoved up into cropped fair hair even though the morning was gray. A watch that caught what little light there was. He had the specific loudness of a man who has never once in his life been on the losing end of a room, and he came at me with all of it. What did you do to my dog? What the hell did you just do to my dog? I did not answer. I am not permitted to answer. He's talking to you, said someone at his shoulder. A second man, smaller, phone already up and filming his friend's outrage as though it were a thing worth keeping. Bro, he's talking to you. The dog flinched at the raised voices and pressed harder against my leg. I felt it trembling through the wool. And I made a small decision then, the kind of decision that does not feel like a decision at the time and only afterward turns out to have been the hinge the whole day swung on. I moved my left hand, just the hand, the glove, off the forestock of the rifle, and I lowered it slowly, palm down, until it rested lightly on the broad, brindled skull between the pinback ears. Not to grip. Not to hold. Just to be a still, warm weight that said, in the only language a frightened animal reads, "You are behind a wall now. Nothing here will reach you." The trembling did not stop, but it eased. Is he petting it? The man's voice climbed. You just tried to break my dog's ribs and now get your hands off my dog. Get your hands off. He reached for the leash clip on the dog's collar, and the dog came up off its haunches with a snarl that was all fear and no threat, lips peeling back, and lunged its head at his hand, and he snatched it away with a curse, and I felt the whole square tighten around us like a drawn breath. I did not move my feet, but I turned my head. Understand what that cost. In 2 hours and 11 minutes I had not turned my head for anything, not for the woman who flicked my metal, not for the boy who counted down from 10 waiting for me to blink, not for the tour guide's whole rehearsed speech about how we were trained to ignore all provocation. I had given the crowd the frozen man they came for. And now, deliberately, so that everyone with a lens could see me do it, I turned my head and I looked the man full in the face for the length of one slow breath. And then I looked down, pointedly, at the dog cowering against my leg with the wet white showing at the corners of its eyes, and then I looked back up at him. I did not say a word. I did not have to. The look said the whole sentence, and 40 phones carried the sentence out into the world. You are the one it is afraid of, not me. He went red, not the flush of embarrassment, the darker red of a man who has just felt a room turn against him and does not yet have the words for it, because the crowd had turned. I could hear it in the quality of the silence, which is a thing you learn to read when you have stood in front of enough of them. There is the silence of a crowd waiting to be entertained, and there is the silence of a crowd that has just watched something it did not expect and is deciding, all together and without a word, whose side it is on. The second silence has weight. It leans. And I felt it lean in that gray forecourt, away from the loud man with the broken leash, and toward the trembling animal and the tall still figure it had chosen to hide behind. "This is assault," the man announced to the phones, to the crowd, to the gray sky. "You all saw it. He assaulted my dog. He put his hands on, I'm gonna have his job. You, toy soldier. You are gonna be out of that stupid hat by tonight, you understand me? I know people. I will end your little job." Somewhere behind him a woman said, quietly but not so quietly that it did not carry, "You let it off the lead. We all saw. You let it off the lead at him." And that was the first crack. That was the first ordinary voice in the crowd deciding it would not let the loud man write the story alone. I still had not spoken. I would not speak for a long time yet, but I want you to sit inside that moment with me, because it is the moment the whole thing turns, and everything grand and public that came later. The palace's answer, the crowd, the thing the king himself finally said, all of it grew from a single gray 90 seconds in which a frightened dog chose a man who had spent his whole disciplined life learning to be worth choosing. The woman in the green coat had gathered the child up onto her hip now, well back from the railing, and she was staring at me with her hand pressed flat over her own mouth, and I understood from her face that she had done the arithmetic I had done, the arithmetic of what happens when a failing leash gives out a stride from a small child, and had arrived at the same total, and was only now, with the danger past, letting herself feel the size of the number. The man saw where I was looking. He followed my eyes to the green coat and the child, and for one instant, something moved behind his outrage. I saw it, a flicker of the arithmetic reaching him too, and then I watched him decide deliberately, the way a man locks a door, not to let it in. Because to let it in would have meant that he was the reckless one, and men like him have built their whole lives on never once being the reckless one. "Are you serious?" he said, and he laughed, and it was an ugly laugh now, nothing like the pleased one he had opened the morning with. "It's a dog. It's my dog and it's fine, look at it, it's you people are insane. It's a dog." "It nearly reached my daughter," the woman in the green coat said. Her voice shook, but she said it. "The leash broke and it nearly reached my daughter and she pointed at me, at my planted boots and my rifle and the dog leaning on my leg, he got between. He got between them. Don't you dare call that assault." The crowd made a low sound. Agreement has a sound. A gate sergeant would arrive soon. I knew that without looking, because a disturbance at the east gate brings a response as reliably as a stone dropped in water brings a ring. And I had already heard, under everything, the particular crisp double time of boots crossing the inner forecourt. But there was a stretch of a minute or two before that, a stretch in which it was only me and the dog and the man and the turning crowd, and in that stretch, the man did the thing that would follow him for the rest of his very comfortable life. He raised his phone. He pointed it at me, at my face, under the brim of the bearskin, and he started narrating. "Everybody remember this face," he said. "This is the guard who assaulted a family pet at the palace, unprovoked. Look at him, he can't even look at me. This is what your tax money, this is your palace guard, everyone, assaulting animals. Wait till this is everywhere. Wait till this is everywhere, pal. I'm gonna make you famous. He was going to make me famous. On that at least he was correct. He was only wrong, catastrophically and expensively wrong, about which of us the fame would land on and in what direction. The boots reached us. Sergeant Havard came through the crowd the way weather comes through a valley, not fast, not loud, but with the whole square adjusting itself around him before he had said a word. He was a broad gray man with 30 years in the tunic, and he had trained me, and I would have followed him into any dark place the crown chose to send us. He took in the scene in the 2 seconds it takes a good sergeant to read a square. The frayed leash, the dog against my leg, the woman with the child, the man with the raised phone, the ring of watching faces. And then he did a thing I did not expect. He came to a halt an arm's length from me, and he glanced down at the dog, and one corner of his mouth moved a bare fraction, and he said low, so only I could hear it, "Well now, Vane, you've made a friend. That is the King's Guard. You will not read it in the tour books." Under the frozen faces, under the not moving and the not speaking, there is a whole warm human company of men who know each other to the bone, and Havard's 4 dry words told me everything I needed. That he had seen enough, that I had done right, that whatever came next I was not standing in it alone. Then he turned to face the man, and the warmth went out of him like a lamp turned down. "Sir," Havard said, "your animal is off its lead in a controlled royal precinct. I'm going to ask you to secure it." "Secure it, secure it. Your man broke the lead." "Your man attacked." "I watched the last of it," Havard said, in the flat, courteous voice that is somehow more frightening than any shout, "and I have 40 witnesses filming the whole of it, and I will watch every frame before this day is out. Right now there is a loose, distressed animal in a public square with a child not 10 feet away, and I would like it secured before we discuss whose fault anything is. Do you have a lead that works?" The man did not have a lead that worked. He had a broken one, swinging its useless brass snap, and he stood there holding it, and for the first time the whole grand engine of his certainty stalled, because the truth of the frayed leather was in his own fist, and there was no one he could hand it to. The dog, meanwhile, would not come out from behind me. Havard crouched slowly sideways, the way a man who understands animals approaches a frightened one, and he held out the back of his hand, and he made the low clicking sound in his throat, and the dog looked at him with its whole body still leaned against my boot, and did not move. It had made its decision about safety, and its decision was the red wool of my leg. "He won't go to you," the man said, and there was an ugly satisfaction in it as though the dog's fear proved something in his favor. "He doesn't go to strangers. He's protective. He's a guard dog, that's the whole point. He's terrified," Havard said, standing again, "of you. Which I imagine is also the whole point, though not the one you meant." He turned his head a fraction toward me. "Vane, he's yours for the minute. Keep him calm. Don't let him bolt into the crowd." So the instruction was given, in front of 40 phones, by a sergeant of the King's Guard. Keep the dog calm. And I, who was not permitted to speak, and not permitted to move from my post except at need or on command, now had both a command and a need, and I lowered my gloved hand again to the broad, warm skull, and I let the animal press its whole trembling weight into my leg, and I stood the strangest post of my whole career. A ceremonial guardsman at the east gate, rifle across his body, one white glove resting on a stranger's frightened dog, while the man who had turned it loose filmed his own humiliation and called it my crime. "This is insane," the man kept saying. "This is insane, you're all insane, it's a dog." But the crowd had stopped being his audience. That is the thing a man like that never sees coming, because he has spent his whole life certain that any crowd is his audience by right. They had been his audience for the length of one laugh and one watch this. Now they were witnesses, and a witness is a very different animal from an audience, and the difference is that a witness remembers. A young man near the front had lowered his own phone and was frowning at his screen, and then he looked up and he said, to no one in particular but loud enough, I got the whole thing, from when he let it off. I got all of it." He looked at the woman in the green coat. "You want it, for, in case he tries to say." "Yes," said the woman in the green coat. "Yes, please. Everyone who filmed it, please, keep it, don't delete." And around the square, I watched a dozen people do a small, quiet thing that I have thought about many times since. They checked their screens, and they nodded to themselves, and they did not delete. The loud man had wanted the footage to be a weapon. He had not understood that footage is only a weapon in the hands of whoever is telling the truth, and that a square full of ordinary strangers had just, without any leader and without any plan, appointed themselves the keepers of what had actually happened. Havard had his radio out now, murmuring into it, and I caught the shape of the words without catching all of them. Animal control, gate incident, footage, and then a phrase that made the fine hairs rise on my arms even under the discipline. "And notify the prince's office. His Highness is in the forecourt wing this morning." The prince's office, Crown Prince Rowan. I had stood guard through 3 years of Rowan's coming and going, and I knew him the way a guardsman knows the royal he serves. From the outside, in glimpses, in the particular sound of his stride, and the particular courtesy he showed to the men on the gates, which was more than most of his rank showed, and less than he probably knew we noticed. He was a serious young man, graver than his years, with the weight of the coming crown already visible on him. And he was, that gray morning, close enough that the disturbance at his own east gate would reach him within minutes. I did not know yet what that would mean. I only knew that a thing which had begun as one loud man and one frightened dog had just, with the mention of the prince, grown larger than the square, and that whatever I did in the next stretch of minutes would be watched not only by 40 phones, but by the house I had sworn my life to. So I did what the discipline had made me. I stood straighter. I kept my hand gentle on the dog, and I waited for what would come through the gate. What came through the gate was not the prince, not yet. What came, at a brisk clip across the inner forecourt, was a woman in the tailored dark coat of a senior palace officer, with a lanyard and a tablet and the particular fast walk of someone whose whole job is to make problems disappear before they reach the people she serves. I did not know her by name then. I would come to. Her name was Mistress Odell, and she managed what the palace primly called public interface, which meant that when the outside world scraped up against the house, she was the one sent to smooth it, and she was very, very good at her work, and her work that morning began by being entirely wrong. She took in the square with a glance as fast as Havard's and reached, with the speed of long practice, for the answer that made the problem smallest. "Sergeant," she said low, "what are we looking at?" "Loose animal, broken lead, member of the public failed to control it. My man got between it and a child. Cleanly. It's on 40 phones and every one of them is on our side." "And him?" She meant the loud man who had begun, seeing a person in a suit, to shift the whole force of his complaint toward her, sensing correctly that she was the kind of person he was used to being able to move. "Ma'am," he called, already crossing to her, hand out, the grin flickering back on like a light. "Finally, someone sensible. Your guard here just assaulted my dog in front of my kids, in front of everyone. Now, I don't want to make a whole thing of it. I really don't. I'm a reasonable guy. But I am going to need a name and a supervisor and probably a formal apology, because I have got this all on video, and I would hate for it to." And Mistress Odell, whose whole training was to make loud men feel heard so that they would go away, made the first mistake of her morning. She glanced at me, at the dog against my leg, at the gentle glove on its skull, and I watched her decide, in the reflexive calculus of her office, that the smallest version of the problem was the one where the guard had overstepped and the member of the public was soothed. "Sir," she said to the man warmly, "I am so sorry you've had a distressing morning. Let me assure you we take any conduct by our guards extremely seriously, and if there's been any error at all—" "There has," said the man. "There absolutely has." "Then we will look into it fully. Sergeant, Perhaps your man should stand down from the post while we—" "No," said Havard. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. But the single flat word landed in the square like a dropped stone, and everyone heard it, and Mistress Odell's practiced warmth stopped like a clock with its spring caught. "Sergeant," she said, quietly, warningly, "I understand you want to protect your man." "I don't want to protect my man," Havard said. "My man doesn't need protecting. My man did his job to the letter, and there is a child on that lady's hip who is going home tonight because of it. And if you stand him down from his post in front of these cameras, you will be telling the whole watching world that the palace believes he did something wrong. And by tonight that is the story. And by tomorrow it is the only story. And in a week when the footage has been watched 1,000,000 times and everyone can see exactly what happened, the palace will look like the institution that threw its own good man to a loud liar to make a Tuesday morning quieter. Now," he let that sit, "you are far better at your work than that. So I am going to ask you to watch 30 seconds of footage before you stand anyone down. 30 seconds. That's all I want. I have served under many officers. I have watched very few of them do what Mistress Odell did next, which was to stop, in the middle of a reflex 30 years in the making, and reconsider." She looked at Havard. She looked at me, really looked, this time, not the fast triage glance but a proper look, at the dog leaning its whole weight into a man who had not so much as shifted his boots, at the gentle glove, at the frozen discipline of me even now with an animal pressed against my leg. She looked at the loud man, and at the frayed leash in his fist, and at the crowd that had stopped being his and become the square's own jury. And she was, as Havard had said, far better at her work than her first reflex. "Show me," she said. The young man at the front held up his phone, and Mistress Odell of the palace's public interface stood in the gray morning and watched 30 seconds of video with the whole square watching her watch it, and I saw the exact frame at which her face changed. It was not the lunge. It was not the broken leash. It was the small, deliberate jerk of the man's wrist a half-second before the leash gave the go on. Go on. The moment the footage made undeniable that he had not been controlling the animal at all but winding it, aiming it, spending it for a laugh at the base of a child's height. "Play that again," she said very quietly. "Ma'am, this is ridiculous," the man began. "Play it again," she said, and there was no warmth left in it at all, and the young man played it again, and Mistress Odell watched the wrist, and the leash, and the child, and the guardsman stepping into the gap, and when it was done she straightened and turned to the man, and I have rarely in my life enjoyed watching a person work as much as I enjoyed watching what she did next, because she did not raise her voice either. "Sir," she said, "you are recording. Good. Please keep recording and please keep this footage because I am going to want a copy of it, and so is animal welfare. And so, I suspect, will the family whose child was at the level of your dog's jaws when your lead, which I can see from here is worn through, gave way." She let a beat pass. "You released a large frightened animal off its lead in a controlled royal precinct, and this guardsman placed his own body between it and a child. That is not assault. That is precisely what he is here to do. Now, I am going to have to ask you to remain, sir, until animal control and an officer have taken statements, because there are questions about the condition of that lead and the control of that animal, and you are going to want to answer them yourself rather than have them answered for you." The man's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. The crowd made the sound again, the low sound, agreement but warmer now, edged with something that in a rougher square might have become a cheer. And Mistress Odell heard it and lifted one hand, palm out, calming, because the last thing the palace wanted at its own gate was a crowd turned into a mob even in a good cause, and the crowd, respecting her, settled. I stood through all of it without a word. The dog had stopped trembling. It had not moved from my leg, but its sides no longer heaved, and its tail had begun, very tentatively, to unclamp itself. And once, just once, it turned its heavy head and pressed its nose briefly against my glove, and I felt something in my chest that the discipline is not supposed to allow and does not in fact forbid, whatever the tour books say. Here is a thing I have never told anyone until now. 12 years before that gray morning, in a different life, in a uniform of a different color in a country that is not this one, and that I am not free to name, I had a dog. Not a pet, a working dog, a searcher, a great patient brindled animal named Pharaoh who went ahead of us into the places we could not see and came back, or did not, and told us with his body which of the two it would be. I loved that dog past sense. He was, for the 2 years I had him, the truest friend I owned in a place where friends had a way of not lasting, and he went ahead of me one gray morning into a place I had ordered him into, and he did not come back, and I have never in the 12 years since been able to decide whether ordering him in had been my duty or my crime. I left that uniform not long after. I came here to the ceremonial life, to the frozen gates, to a discipline that would never again ask me to send a good animal into the dark. And I had stood these gates for years and never once let myself think about Pharaoh on post, because a guardsman who is thinking about his grief is a guardsman who is not thinking about his gate. But when that frightened dog pressed its nose against my glove, 12 years came up through me all at once, and I understood exactly why I had moved the way I moved, why I had met the lunge and given, why I had caught it like an egg, why the very last thing in the world I would ever do was strike a frightened animal, even one coming at a child, even to save the child, because there is always a way to save the child that does not require hurting the beast. And it is the guardsman's whole art to find that way in the half-second the world allows. I had found it for a stranger's dog in a gray square because I had failed to find it, long ago, in a place I still could not name, for a dog I had loved past sense. The man was not done. Men like that are never done, right up until the moment they are very finished all at once. "You can't hold me," he said to Mistress Odell, finding his voice, finding his height again. "You can't detain me. You have no authority to. I'll leave whenever I—" And he took 2 steps back toward the gate as if to prove it. And the dog, hearing his voice sharpen, hearing the movement, came up off my leg with a scramble of claws, not toward him but away from him, and lunged the length of its own fear straight into the crowd. And I moved again. Not with the rifle this time. There was no space for the rifle and no need for it. I dropped. In a single motion the drill had built into me over years, and my white glove closed on the trailing collar exactly as the dog's front feet left the ground, and I took its whole desperate weight on my braced arm and my planted knee, and I turned the bolt into a wheel again, that same giving catch, so that the animal spun to a stop against my chest instead of vanishing into a forest of legs and phones and small children. It came around hard. Its heart was going like a drum. And I knelt there in the wet on the cobbles of the east gate, a decorated guardsman of the King's Guard in the mud with his bearskin knocked askew and both arms full of a shaking stranger's dog, and I held it, and I made the low sound in my throat that I had made 12 years ago to a different animal in a different dark, and it stopped fighting me, and it pressed its whole head into the crook of my arm and stayed. The square had gone perfectly silent. Not the silence of a crowd waiting to be entertained. Not even the silence of a crowd deciding whose side it is on. This was the third silence, the one you almost never hear, the silence of a great many people watching something true happen in front of them and understanding, all at once and without a word, that they will remember it for a long time. I have felt that silence perhaps 3 times in my life. It has a temperature. It is warm. And into that warm silence, from the direction of the inner gate, walked the Crown Prince. I did not turn my head, even kneeling, even with my arms full of dog, some part of the discipline held, but I did not need to turn my head to know him. I knew the stride. I knew the way the 2 guards flanking him fell back a respectful half-step as he crossed the threshold into the forecourt, and I knew the way the whole square rearranged itself once more, the phone swinging toward him, the low murmur running through the crowd, "The Prince. That's the Prince," and I knew, from the small change in the pressure of the morning, that the thing which had begun as one loud man's game had now reached the house itself. Crown Prince Rowan was perhaps 30 then. He wore no ceremony that morning, a dark plain coat, no orders, no attendance beyond the 2 guards, and he had come out, I later learned, not because he had been told a guardsman was in trouble, but because he had heard, through the open window of the forecourt wing, a dog in terror and a man shouting, and had gone toward the sound the way some men are simply built to go toward the sound. He came to a halt a few paces off, and he took in the square, and he took in me kneeling on the cobbles with a stranger's dog pressed into my chest, and I watched his grave young face do the arithmetic that Mistress Odell had done, that the woman in the green coat had done, that 40 phones had done, and arrive, faster than any of them, at the total. "Sergeant Havard," the prince said. "Report." And Havard, standing to attention, gave it in the clean flat sentences of a man who has given 1,000 reports and knows that the plain truth needs no ornament. The loose animal, the frayed lead, the deliberate wrist, the child at the railing, the guardsman into the gap, the catch, the second catch, the dog that would not leave the guardsman's side. He gave it in perhaps 40 seconds. He left out nothing that mattered and added nothing that did not. And when he was done, the prince stood quiet for a moment, and then he did a thing that I have turned over in my mind more times than I can count. He crossed to me and he crouched down, the crown prince in his plain dark coat, down on his heels on the wet cobbles of his own east gate, so that his face was level with mine and with the dog's, and he looked at the animal, and he held out the back of his hand exactly as Havard had, low and still, and he said softly, not to me, to the dog, there now, you've had a bad morning, haven't you?" The dog looked at him, and then I felt it happen, the loosening, the decision. The dog leaned out from my chest, just a little, and touched its nose to the prince's offered hand, and did not flinch. It had begun to come back to itself. The warm, still man beside me had bought it enough safety that it could begin, tentatively, to trust the shape of a kind hand again, and it had chosen the prince's. And the prince led it, gravely, patiently, and something went around the square that was past agreement, past even the warm silence, and was very close to love. Then the crown prince stood, and he turned, and the softness went out of his face the way it had gone out of Mistress Odell's, and he looked at the loud man. "You are the owner of this animal," the prince said. It was not a question. The man had, at the sight of the prince, undergone a rapid and total change of strategy. The outrage was gone. The certainty was gone. What replaced it was the oily reasonableness of a man who has correctly identified the most important person in the room and is now trying, desperately and far too late, to become that person's friend. "Your Highness, your Royal Highness. Look, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Honestly, I love that dog, he's my best friend, and I got scared, you know. When your man went at him, I overreacted. I said some things. And I want to, I'm happy to make a donation actually to the guards, to whatever charity I really am. This doesn't have to be a..." "You wound your dog up," the prince said, "and you loosed it at my guardsman off its lead, astride from a child, for a video. I have been standing here longer than you realize." The man's mouth worked. "I could see the window of the room I was in," the prince said mildly. "I heard you say 'watch this,' twice." The square was very quiet. "That is not," the prince went on in the same mild voice, which was somehow far worse than any anger, "a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when 2 reasonable people read one event 2 ways. This was not that. This was one man who believed that because a guardsman is forbidden to react, the guardsman could be used as a prop, as a target, as the straight man in a joke, with no cost to the man using him. You believed my guard was a thing that could be provoked for free." He paused. "You were wrong about the cost. You were wrong about the guard. And you were very wrong about the free." I want to set down exactly what the prince did not do, because it is the measure of him. He did not have the man arrested on the spot in front of the cameras, which would have been easy and would have felt, to the crowd, like justice, and which the prince understood would have made the man a martyr in his own retelling. The poor dog lover, dragged off by royal thugs, it's on video. Look how they treated me. He did not raise his voice, which would have handed the man a clip of a prince losing his temper. He did none of the things a smaller man in his position would have reached for. He did something colder and far more complete. Mistress Odell, the prince said, without looking away from the man. This gentleman is very keen that the footage of this morning should be everywhere. He said so, I'm told, several times. I think we should help him. I would like every second of footage from every witness collected, verified, and released, in full, unedited from the moment he first raised his phone through the palace's own channels with a plain factual account. Not our word against his, the whole of it. Let the watching world make up its own mind. Now he looked finally at the man. You wanted to make my guard famous. I think that's a fine idea. I think we should make this morning as famous as it can possibly be. Every frame. Don't you agree? I watched the man understand what had just happened to him. It arrived on his face in stages, the way the tide comes into a flat harbor, first the edges, then all at once. He had come to the square that morning armed with the one weapon he understood, which was the power to shape a story by shouting loudest and filming most. And the prince had, without a single raised word, taken that weapon out of his hands and turned it around and was now proposing to fire it. The full footage, unedited, from the wind-up of the wrist, the go on. The child at the railing, the guardsman into the gap, the dog that hid behind the red wool from its own owner. Every frame the man had shot to destroy me would, released whole, destroy only him, and he had shot a great deal of it, and so had 40 strangers, and the prince was proposing to give the world all of it and let the world decide. You can't, the man said, it came out small. You can't just, that's my footage, that's my. You've been broadcasting it to a public square for 10 minutes, Mistress Odell said, not unkindly. And every person here filmed the same thing from their own angle. There is nothing to release that you have not already released yourself. His Highness is simply proposing that we help you finish the job. The dog, sensing perhaps the change in the air, or simply exhausted at last, sighed a great heaving sigh and lay down across my knee, and put its heavy head on my boot and closed its eyes. It should have ended there. In the tidy version, the footage would eventually tell, it very nearly did. But real mornings do not end where the story wants them to, and there was one more turn in that gray square, and it was the turn that mattered most to me, and it had nothing to do with the man at all. Animal control arrived, 2 of them, a young man and an older woman, in the sensible padded coats of people who spend their days with frightened creatures, carrying a slip lead and a scanner and the flat professional calm of their trade. And the moment they came through the gate, the whole feeling of the square changed for me, because I understood, in the cold, clean way the Post teaches, what their arrival meant for the animal asleep across my knee. The woman crouched by the dog and ran the scanner over the back of its neck and frowned and ran it again. No chip, she said. You said it's yours. This to the man. Of course it's mine, I've had him 2 years. Registration, vet records, anything on you. The man did not have registration. The man did not have vet records. The man, it emerged, in the halting way that these things emerge, did not entirely have a clear account of where the dog had come from at all, beyond that he had gotten him off a guy. And the young animal control officer and the older one exchanged a look that I have seen exchanged over many creatures, and the older one said, gently, to the man, the sentence that changed the stakes of the whole morning. Sir, an unchipped, unregistered large breed animal that's displayed as unmanaged as this one, in a public incident, with no controlling paperwork and a handler who, forgive me, has just been recorded deliberately loosing it toward a child. That's going to be a seizure. We're going to have to take the animal. And I have to be honest with you about what happens after, because it's not always. She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. Everyone in that square who had ever loved an animal knew the shape of the sentence she did not finish, and I knew it best of all, because I had once sent a good dog into a place it did not come back from, and I could not, I found, kneeling there with the warm weight of the creature across my knee and its heavy head on my boot. I could not bear to be the reason a second one went somewhere it did not come back from, even for a stranger's dog. Especially for a stranger's dog, that had crossed a gray square full of 100 people and chosen me to be safe behind, and had been right too. I had not spoken all morning. I had let the discipline hold my tongue through the man's shouting and the officer's wrongness and the prince's arithmetic. But there is a place where the discipline ends and the man begins, and I had reached it, and I did the second forbidden thing of the morning. I spoke. "Sir," my voice came out rough. A guardsman's voice is not much used on post, and the whole square turned to it because they had none of them heard me make a sound, and there is a particular attention that falls on a statue that suddenly speaks. I did not look at the prince. I looked at the animal control woman. If the animal is to be seized, and if the owner forfeits it, I chose the words the way you choose your footing on ice. I would ask to be considered as a home for it. I have kept a working dog before. I know the breed. I have quarters that allow an animal, and it has, I stopped. I made myself finish it. It has decided something about me this morning that I would not like to disappoint. The silence that followed was the fourth silence, which I did not have a name for until that morning, and which I can only describe as the sound a great many strangers make when a man they have been watching turns out to have a heart, and shows it, and asks for one small thing with it. It is not warm like the third silence. It is something better. It is the sound of a crowd deciding altogether that they are going to want this man to get the thing he has asked for. The man, the loud man, the owner, heard me ask for his dog, and something ugly came up in him one last time, the reflex of a man who cannot bear to be shown a better version of himself. "Oh, so now you want him," he said. "Now that everyone's filming, now you're the big hero, gonna adopt the poor dog you assaulted, get your little moment." "Enough," said the crown prince, quietly, and it was enough. But the older animal control officer was shaking her head, not unkindly, and she said the thing that I had known she would have to say, the thing that turned the false dawn back into a long gray uncertainty. "It's not that simple, and I'm sorry, because that's a kind offer and I can see the animals taken to you. But there's a process. A seized animal goes into the system, it gets held, assessed for temperament, checked for health, and any rehoming goes through the proper channels with a proper assessment, and it can take weeks, and there's no guarantee at the end of it, because an animal that's shown this much fear reactivity in public is going to be flagged, and flagged animals don't always, and again, she did not finish. Again, she did not have to. Weeks in the system, flagged, and at the end of the weeks, no guarantee. I looked down at the dog asleep across my knee, at the sides that had finally stopped heaving, at the tail that had finally come out from under, at the heavy trusting head on my boot, and I understood that I had bought this animal a single safe hour in a gray square and could not, by myself, buy it anything more, because the process was the process, and I was one guardsman kneeling on the cobbles, and the process did not bend for one guardsman kneeling on the cobbles. And I felt the old helplessness come up, the exact helplessness of the morning I had sent Pharaoh into the dark on a lawful order and watched the process, the mission, the plan, the thing larger than any one man's love, carry my friend away from me and not give him back. The dog would go into the van. It would go into the system. It would be a number and a flag and a temperament assessment, and it would sit in a concrete run and grow more frightened, not less, because frightened animals in concrete runs grow more frightened and not less, and the flag would grow with the fear, and at the end of the weeks, no guarantee. Unless someone with more power than a kneeling guardsman decided otherwise. I did not look at the prince. I had asked my one small thing and the discipline had returned and closed over me, and I would not ask a second. But into the long gray silence, from where he stood in his plain dark coat with the whole square watching him, the crown prince spoke, and what he said turned the morning for the last time. "Then let me help the process," said Crown Prince Rowan, Move faster." He came and crouched again beside me and the dog. The second time, in a single morning, that the heir to the throne had put his knees in the wet at his own east gate, and he laid his own bare hand alongside my gloved one on the animal's flank, and he was quiet a moment, and then he spoke to the animal control officer without any of the mildness he had used on the man. This was a different voice. This was the voice of a young man who would one day give lawful orders to a whole kingdom, trying it out, and finding that it fit. "You are entirely right that there is a process," the prince said, "and I would not ask you to break it. A seized animal is assessed for temperament and health, and rehomed only through a proper assessment with a competent handler, and that is exactly as it should be, and I will not have it done any other way. But," he looked down at the dog, then up at her, "the competent handler assessment, what does it require?" The woman blinked. "That the proposed handler has suitable premises, experience with the breed, no history that disqualifies, and passes a home and temperament assessment with the animal, usually over several supervised sessions to be sure the bond is genuine and not a—" she glanced at the man, at his cameras, and chose her word, "not a moment. This guardsman kept a working dog of this breed under conditions I suspect were considerably harder than a garden and a warm room," the prince said. "His premises are crown premises and can be inspected within the hour. His history is a matter of record, and I will vouch for it personally. And as for whether the bond is a moment or a genuine thing," and here, for the first time all morning, something almost like a smile touched the grave young face, "the animal has been asleep on his boot for 10 minutes with 100 strangers and its own frightened owner shouting around it. I have never in my life seen a clearer temperament assessment, but conduct yours anyway. Take all the sessions you need. I ask only one thing, that while the assessment is done, the animal be held not in a concrete run where its fear will grow, but with the one handler it has already in front of all these witnesses, chosen, fostered to him, pending assessment. That is within your discretion, I believe, for a low-risk case with a vouched competent handler and an urgent welfare interest. Is it not?" The woman looked at the sleeping dog and at the kneeling guardsman and at the crown prince of the realm with his hand on the animal's flank vouching for a man he barely knew, and she was, like Mistress Odell, better at her work than the smallest version of it. "It is within my discretion," she said slowly, "for a low-risk case. Yes, emergency foster to a vouched handler pending full assessment." She looked at me. "You'd have supervised visits from us, weekly at first. And if the assessment fails, the animal comes back into the system, and I will not bend that part for anyone, your highness or no." "I would not ask you to," said the prince. "And if it passes," I said, it was the third time I had spoken, I could not help it. "If it passes," she said, "then he's yours. Properly chipped, registered, and yours." She almost smiled. "But you'll do the paperwork like everyone else, no skipping the queue." "I would not skip the queue," I said, "for anything in the world," and some of the crowd laughed, the good low laugh of people who have watched a hard thing come out right, and the dog opened one eye at the sound and looked up at me and thumped its tail once against the cobbles and shut the eye again and slept. That was the turn. That was the whole of the turn, and I want to be honest that it was a quiet one, no arrest in handcuffs, no shouting, no man dragged away. The niche of my life, if you will forgive me the phrase, is stillness, and the turn of my morning was still. But do not mistake stillness for softness. Because the consequence for the loud man was landing, in that same gray square, and it was landing harder than any pair of handcuffs. He had come to the palace that morning to spend a guardsman for a laugh. He had believed, with the whole certainty of a man who has never once paid for anything, that a person forbidden to react was a person who could be used for free. And in the space of 1 gray hour he had lost the dog he claimed to love, seized, forfeit, being fostered before his eyes to the very man he had tried to destroy, and he had lost the crowd, and he had lost the footage, which the prince was about to release in full, and he had lost, most completely, the the story. He had wanted to be the man in the video who was wronged by a palace guard. He was going to be instead the man in the video who loosed a frightened dog at a child and lost the animal to the guard who saved them both. Forever, in full, unedited, from the wind up of the wrist. "You can't take my dog," he said, but it was hollow now, and he knew it was hollow, and everyone heard that he knew. "We're not taking your dog, sir," the animal control woman said. "You loosed an uncontrolled animal at a child and forfeited it under the seizure. There's a difference, and the paperwork will note it, and you'll want to read the paperwork carefully before you say anything else to anyone with a camera." She stood. "Someone from our office and an officer will need your full details now. This way, please." And it was then, as the man was turning, trapped, deflating, reaching for the last shreds of a morning that had been so entirely taken from him, that the true weight of the house arrived, because a second figure had come out through the inner gate while all eyes were on the dog, and had stood, unremarked in the shadow of the arch, watching the whole last stretch of it. An older man, plainly dressed as his son had been, but with a stillness about him that the whole square felt before it understood, a stillness that made even Mistress Odell come to attention, and the guards flanking the gate straighten by a degree that only a guardsman would have measured. It was the king. King Alaric had not been summoned. Kings are not summoned to gate disturbances. He had come, I later learned, for the same reason his son had come, because a commotion at his own threshold is a thing a certain kind of man goes toward rather than away from, and he had arrived in time to see a guardsman kneeling in the wet with a stranger's dog asleep on his boot, and his own heir crouched in the mud beside them vouching for the man, and he had stood in the arch and watched and said nothing, and let his son handle it, which is its own kind of trust and its own kind of teaching. But now he moved, and the square felt him move, and the loud man, turning to be led away, found himself, at the very last, face to face with the king of the realm. The king did not shout at him. The king, I have come to understand, has spent so many years being the largest thing in every room that he has lost all need to prove it, and the men who have lost all need to prove it are the only truly frightening men. And the loud man, who had spent his whole life being loud precisely because he was afraid of being small, stood in front of a quiet old king and became, at last, exactly as small as he had always feared he was. "I have been king of this realm for a long time," King Alaric said, and his voice was not raised at all, and carried to every corner of the square as only a voice that never needs to be raised can carry. "And in that time a great many people have stood at my gates and tried, in a great many ways, to make my guardsmen move. It is a strange hunger. I have never fully understood it, this wish to reach into a man who has chosen stillness and force him to break, only so that you may say you did it. But I have watched it long enough to know its shape, and I know that it is never truly about the guardsman. It is about the person who does it. It is a man standing in front of a stillness he does not have and cannot buy and cannot bear, and so he tries to spoil it, because a thing he cannot have is easier to bear once it is spoiled." The man said nothing. There was nothing to say. "You could not make my guardsman break," the king said. "So you tried to spoil him instead, to make him the villain of a little film, to take from him the one thing a man in his position has, which is that everyone knows he did his duty. You failed. He did his duty in front of 100 witnesses, and his duty, this morning, happened to be as plain and as human, and as good as anything I have seen at these gates in 40 years. He put his body between your fear and a child's, and then he refused to answer your fear with cruelty, and gentled it instead, because that is the harder thing and the better thing, and he is the kind of man who does the harder, better thing when no one has ordered him to, and it would have been so much easier not to." He paused. "You wanted the world to watch this morning. It will. My son is right. Every frame of it will go out, whole and unedited, through my own household, so that no one may say we hid it or shaped it. And the world will watch you loose a frightened animal at a child for a laugh, and it will watch this man save them both without harming either, and it will draw the only conclusion there is to draw. That is your consequence. I will not add handcuffs to it. I do not need to. You have handcuffed yourself, and you did it on camera, and you will wear it a great deal longer than any court could make you." He turned then from the man, dismissed him, simply by ceasing to look at him, which is the most complete dismissal there is, and he looked down at me, still kneeling with the dog across my boot, and the whole terrible weight of him became, all at once, something else. "Guardsman," the king said, "what is your name?" "Vane, your majesty," I said. "Corvin Vane." "Stand up, Corvin Vane," the king said gently. "You'll ruin your knees and the animal will forgive you." And I rose carefully, gathering the dog up in my arms as I came, all its warm, heavy, trusting weight, and I stood at last full height in the gray square with a stranger's rescued dog in my arms, and the king of the realm looking at me with an expression I will keep for the rest of my life. "I watched you," the king said, low, for me more than for the crowd now, though the crowd heard it. "I saw you catch it and give with it twice, so that nothing was broken, not the child, not the railing, not even the beast that came at you. Where did a ceremonial guardsman learn to catch a charging animal like an egg and never once strike it?" And I understood that he knew that a king who has spent 40 years reading men had read in the way I moved, the thing I had never told anyone, the other uniform, the other country, the dog named Pharaoh who went ahead of me into the dark. I understood that he was giving me the chance to say it or to keep it, and that either would be honored. "I lost a dog once, Majesty," I said. "A long time ago, in a place I'm not free to name. It was a good animal and it trusted me, and I sent it somewhere it did not come back from because I was ordered to and I obeyed. I have thought ever since that if I were ever near a frightened animal again, I would find the way to save the small thing that did not require harming the beast. There is almost always a way. It only takes half a second longer to find it, and the half second is the whole of the art." I looked down at the dog in my arms. "I found it this time." The king was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, so that the whole square heard it, "You found it this time." And he reached out and laid his hand, once, flat and firm, on the dog's head between my arms, the same place I had laid mine an hour before, and the dog leaned into it, and the king said, "Then you had better keep him, Corvin Vane, and pass every assessment they set you, and do the paperwork like everyone else. But if the assessment should fail," and here he looked, very briefly and very levelly, at the animal control woman who did not flinch, to her great credit, "you will send me the reason in writing, and I will read it myself, because I should like to be very sure that a good dog was not taken from a good man for a small reason. That is all I ask. Fairness. The same fairness this man showed a frightened beast that came at him with its teeth." "It won't fail, Your Majesty," said the animal control woman, and she almost smiled again. "I've done this 30 years. It won't fail." It did not fail. That is nearly the end, and I will tell you the end plainly, because the discipline that governs my post governs my telling too, and a guardsman does not pad his report. The footage went out whole, through the palace's own channels, exactly as the prince had promised and the king had ordered, every frame, from the wind-up of the wrist to the dog asleep on my boot. And the world did precisely what the king had said it would do, and drew the only conclusion there was. The loud man got the fame he had wanted, and it was the ruin of the small, comfortable life he had built on never being the reckless one, and I am told he is quieter now, though I would not know, having never sought him out and never wished him harm. He loosed a frightened dog at a child for a laugh, and he lost the dog, the crowd, the footage, and the story, and he did it all himself, on camera, and no hand of mine or the king's added a thing to it. The dog passed its assessments, all of them, over 6 weeks of the animal control woman coming weekly to my crown quarters, and watching a great brindled creature meet me at the door, and lean its whole weight against my leg the way it had leaned against my boot in the gray square. She signed the last form on a bright morning in the courtyard, and she shook my hand, and she said, "In 30 years I've seized a lot of animals, guardsman. I don't often get to watch one come out the far side into a life like this. Thank you for that. I named him Pharaoh. I could not have named him anything else." He is asleep as I write this across my boots, which is where he sleeps, and where he will sleep out the rest of his good long life. And there is not a morning I put on the red tunic and the bearskin and the white gloves that I do not think of the gray square, and the failing leash, and the half-second in which a man forbidden to move learned, all over again, exactly what the stillness had been saving him for. Because that is the thing they never tell you about the discipline. They tell you what it forbids. They will never tell you you have to stand the gate yourself for years and be tested before you learn it, that the whole point of teaching a man to be perfectly still is so that on the one morning it matters, he can move perfectly and cleanly and without cruelty, and put his body exactly where a body is needed, and save the small thing without harming the beast. The stillness was never the cage. The stillness was the reservoir. And I have never, before or since, been so glad to have spent my whole disciplined life filling it. As I was on the gray morning, a man set his dog loose on a royal guard, and the whole square watched to see if the statue would break, and the statue did not break, and instead, very gently, caught what was thrown and gave with it and held on.